Hi, everyone. Welcome to Outfest Los Angeles 2020. My name is Brendan Lucas. I'm the Legacy Project Manager for the Outfest UCLA Legacy Project, and we're here to talk about the film Ask Anybody, a mashup film that draws on 126 different films from the golden era of gay porn, directed by Evan Purchell. He curates the Ask Anybody Instagram account, which is an historical excavation of the visual culture, promotional material, and print publications that surveyed and supported gay male sexual culture in the last century. And he hosts the new podcast, Ask Anybody, with Tyler Thomas, where they have embarked on an in-depth exploration of each of the films that's excerpted in the documentary Ask Anybody. So I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Evan Purchell. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Evan, where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Austin, Texas. Very hot.
As it is here in Los Angeles, I hope you're staying cool, the AC, fingers crossed. So your incredible work, Ask Anybody. We had the great pleasure of being able to watch this film, enjoy it, and start kind of like peeling apart its mysteries. It's an incredible work of documentary, but also sort of narrative as well. And you've researched, scoured the archives and video collections, to assemble this incredible work that documents a sort of lost time of gay male sexuality, of filmmaking, of film and video consumption. And it's really, really tremendous. So thank you, first of all, for the film. We're kind of curious, I'm curious, what drew you to this era of pornography or of filmmaking?
I think it really kind of comes out of my interest in both exploitation and genre film and queer cinema in general. A few years ago, my partner and I, we were living in Tampa, Florida, and we drove all the way to Orlando to go to a screening of Wakefield Pool's Bijou that the director was at. And I had seen some like vintage porn stuff before, and I kind of got it. But seeing that film in like a theatrical context with the actual filmmaker there, it really kind of opened my eyes up and made me want to know, like, what else is out there. This exists. What else is out there? And I have a very obsessive sort of personality. So like once I get interested in something, I just keep wanting to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's what kind of led me into to watching the films, and then led me into wanting to learn more about them and research them. And through that, I started seeing, oh, these films actually were kind of part of mainstream gay culture. Isn't that interesting? And as I kept going deeper in that, I started seeing all this imagery and these ads and, magazine covers, things like that. And I just wanted to get that imagery back out there. And that was kind of the impetus for the Instagram project, to get this imagery back out to a younger generation and to honor the people who really risked a lot to make these movies.
It's interesting that biographically you mentioned an interest in like exploitation and genre cinema, and there seems to be in the biography of some of the filmmakers that you are looking at in this era, a sort of a professional overlap between adult cinema and other forms of like mainstream above ground cinema or documentary. Could you talk about that overlap just in terms of like obsessive fandom, but also in terms of creation?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people who were making these movies back in the 70s and 80s, they were people who loved film and wanted to make movies. And, with this genre, as long as they put sex scenes in a movie, they could do whatever they wanted. They could tell whatever type of story they wanted. And it's not true of every gay director, but a lot of them, they use that as an opportunity to, put their lives on screen. I know Arthur Bresson, who made Buddies and Gay USA, he was really happy with working in the adult realm because it meant that he got to tell gay stories and do gay romances or doing things like that. With filmmakers also like Joe Gage or Tom DeSimone, there's a lot of overlap between, the genre world and the adult world, just in terms of budgets. They both of them wound up crossing over into, more reputable film, but I am still very firmly in like the exploitation tradition. A lot of horror films, things like that.
I think it was in the episode 3 of the podcast, you were talking about Light from the Second Story Window, where that, involved a lot of people who came from the Society of Pat Rocco Enlightened Enthusiasts, or SPREE. So Pat Rocco is known to fans of the Legacy Project as being one of the foundational kind of filmmakers that whose work formed one of the cornerstones of the collection of the Legacy Project, and his collection and his work just keeps generating new discoveries. There's so much work, and he worked in this like interesting kind of tone, but he was interesting, and you explore this. It's like he kind of worked in the erotic or softcore era before hardcore pornography, gay pornography really took off, which was a fascinating kind of detail that you looked at. Could you also talk a little bit about some of the, I guess, some of the films that you're looking at are adaptations. There's these different sources of the stories that you're looking at. So because the film is narrative in a way, could you talk a little bit about some of the narrative aspects of the films that you're looking at in this era?
Sure. I mean, really, a lot of these films, they're kind of almost, I say this a lot, but they're kind of the beginning of what we now call queer cinema. In these films, you have some of the first coming out stories. You have the first, gay romances. You have the first, movies that kind of question between, monogamy and promiscuity. You have gay horror movies. You have really every type of, genre you could think of, every type of story you could think of is kind of explored in these films. There's some that are about like gay marriage even back in the 70s, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people like joke about like, oh, these movies had a plot or whatever. But I think some of them really kind of tackle with some interesting issues that I think hold up really well. I think one of the big ones for me is Joe Gage's L.A. Tool and Die, which is the third film in a trilogy that he made, and it's this really fascinating like story about like settling down and aging and kind of leaving the wild 70s behind and getting into a long-term relationship with someone. And it's really sweet, and for you think porn is a very kind of light genre, but I mean that movie, one of the main characters in that movie is a Vietnam vet who's dealing with PTSD and keeps having flashbacks to his time in the war, and it's really kind of intense for something that people would think of as just being escapist and fun.
In terms of cutting a path through this material, because I think at one point on the podcast, you talked about something like, you said there's something like 1,000, maybe like 1,000 films in this era of gay adult filmmaking. So how did you start to create a path?
Sure. In my editing work, I've always been very inspired by the work that a group called Everything is Terrible does. Everything they do is found footage. And I think they're more well known for like their shorter little like YouTube clips, but their feature length work is really fascinating because the way they use these clips, they kind of put them in conversation with each other. Like the last clip has something to do with the current clip, which has something to do with the next clip, and they really kind of build narratives through all these disparate sources. So that was kind of like one of the biggest inspirations for the way I put mine together, and it was a very modular process. It was I'm going to do a bar scene, I'm going to do a club scene, I'm going to do a party scene, I'm going to do a tea room scene. And it just kind of came, and from there I just make a list of all the movies that I knew had sequences shot in those locations, and then it just kind of came down to finding a way to cut them together, try to find a way that like find like a movie that had like one long sequence that I could use as like the basis for something, and then just kind of cut all this other stuff into it to try to make something new. And then after that, it was just finding the correct order and the correct way to link them together. So,
yeah, in retrospect, that makes total sense, and I love that EIT, Everything is Terrible, is your inspiration. But tonally, one of the things that I love about the movie too is that there is the potential to fall into like making fun of the material, especially as the distance between like modern production and narrative aesthetics and the production aesthetics and situations of vintage porn grows greater. So I love that you do it with like, I mean, there's respect for the material, of course, but like when things are supposed to be funny, it's like there's humor to be found in like just some of the situations that they attempt with the films. But in a way,
always talk about the scene with the dancer who has the metal balls like coming out of his ass, and I did not add the sound effects to that.
Yeah, it's like it's important to remember that it's like a lot of these filmmakers were not unself-aware. It's like they set out to do one thing, or maybe a couple. They had a couple of intents in the different scenes that they were shooting. And often it seems like from watching the overall arc of the kind of loose story that you've created, that there is a narrative form of filmmaking that has gone away from more contemporary forms of like gay pornography. Could you talk about like the drop off of why story disappeared from like porn filmmaking?
I mean, I think the easy answer is always home video. That and a combination. I guess it's less the AIDS epidemic and more just video in general. I think there's always this kind of constant sort of struggle in these films between, you know, is it a good porn film or is it a good film? And I think really once you start moving in the home video era and the budgets start getting even smaller, and um, all these filmmakers are kind of like all just churning out video after video after video, it really becomes a form of, what does the audience want and what will sell and what can we do them do cheaper, and what can we do faster, and it's just the sex and none of the other stuff, or just finding a way to like link the sex in like the most like simple sort of way.
I think it was in episode 3 of your podcast where you had kind of pointed out 1976, 77 as kind of the peak and decline of the dedicated like gay porn cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. It was so important to contextualize that as, the story or like the filmmaking started to recede as a component of maybe like gay cruising or gay sex clubs. But
Yeah,
that
the theaters became more of like sex clubs than actual like movie theaters, which is
right.
fascinating.
And one of the things, I mean, as a cinephile and watching a movie, there's that meta experience of watching people in a theater, albeit cruising for sex in the context of the film. But it kind of speaks to the ways that the film and the films that you're looking at kind of are documenting a way of moving through space as a gay
Mm-hmm.
man that's disappeared. You talked about video, and I want to move on to some of the material questions of how you made this movie. How did you access the films that you excerpted in making this documentary?
It was a variety of different ways. Some were some that I had access to online. I would want to say about 40 or 50 of the 126 were things that I digitized myself. Um, I have a big tape collection. I also have friends in other cities who are like collectors, and they mailed me their tapes just to digitize for it. Might have snuck a few things out of an archive or two. I'm not gonna name names, but um, it was a bunch of different things. So
And it brings up the sort of historical point of the transition to video, but it seems like in some ways these films had new life, kind of like the Hollywood studio catalogs. They found a new life on home video, like porn labels.
well, most of the ones that are still around today they operate in a very gray area.
We're in an interesting moment now where I think there's some high profile like examples of gay porn from especially the mid to late 70s being rediscovered in sort of an institutional context or being reissued to like DVD labels or online. So why now, or what could you talk a little bit about the rediscovery of gay porn?
Sure. I don't want to, maybe I'm incorrect on this, but I think, enough distance has kind of passed since, the height of the AIDS epidemic. We're in the age of PrEP now. The children always want to learn more about the past and the aesthetic of the past. I think that really has a big part to do with it, really. Like when I started my Instagram account, I really didn't know who would follow it or who would be interested in this sort of stuff. A majority of the people who follow it are around my age, which is really exciting. I think people really have an interest in gay history, and I think it just kind of plays into that. And I think gay people in general just love porn, so it's an easy barrier to get people interested in it.
Well, you start to get into some of the like respectability and kind of like assimilationist politics of why a certain period, for some obvious reasons and not so obvious reasons, why it might be considered off limits or something worth forgetting about or something that should be overcome. But I think what you have done with Ask Anybody, and sort of your larger project of unpacking, unearthing this history, is showing that it is valid and worth remembering. And as the Ask Anybody, the film, takes a particular tack of, it's not a talking head documentary. It's not an explanatory documentary. It's in some ways lets the material speak for itself. But in terms of your larger historical project, it's so well researched, and you're taking a look at these different films on a production, aesthetic, intertextual, historic level that honestly not only do most people looking at porn, but most film podcasts don't do. So I really have to commend you for making a podcast that gives the right amount of attention to plot summary and historical context and production. Could you talk a little bit more, because it's in unearthing some of these filmmakers, you discover there's kind of like in the history of porn, there's people who have porn names, alter egos. Maybe you could talk a little bit about a bit more about the multiple hats that people would wear in the adult entertainment industry, and some of the other careers that you've unearthed.
Sure. It's really interesting with the gay side of the industry, because it's almost kind of a double closet sort of thing. One, these people don't want it to be publicly known who they are, and two, sorry, let me start that over. Sorry
Sure.
For all these stops. It's kind of interesting when it comes to kind of the gay side of the industry, because it is almost a sort of double closet sort of thing. These people already don't want their names out there because they're working in technically a legal industry, but they also don't want their names out there because it's the gay side of the industry. So sometimes it takes a lot of detective work to try to figure out who some of these people are. I've been able to ID a few directors who I don't think had been previously known before, which is exciting. It kind of ties back to the sort of like obsessive compulsion behind my research. Like, I want to figure this out. I want to find out who these people are. And like some of the ones I've found are like really fascinating. This one director who started off as a burlesque dancer in New York, he made movies under a bunch of different names. One of them is called Sex Demon, which is a gay remake of The Exorcist. And it turns out that after he was making these movies, he kind of helped put together one of the first gay public access TV shows, Gay Morning America in New York. So he was kind of a pioneer in gay TV. Was involved with all these other things too, and really, I think it's fascinating that people took those risks and did these things and made these movies. I don't know. Yeah.
I had not heard of Gay Morning America. I was thinking when I was kind of prepping for this, I was thinking about, is it Emerald City TV, which is like another.
And Wakefield was on that a bunch of times.
Oh, was he? Because I was wondering about where you source some of like the audio interviews that appear in the podcast, which was really interesting. Is that another? That's like a supplementary thing that's outside of the film, because it's so focused on like the films themselves.
Yeah. Well, on the last episode, the Light from the Second Story Window, my partner did the readings for those.
Oh, cool. Okay. So not it was like not necessarily primary source, a reinterpretation of primary source.
Yeah.
Very cool.
We didn't want people to listen to just us yapping for an hour and a half.
What was that?
We didn't want people just like listening to us yapping for an hour and a half. We need to spice it up a little bit.
No, it's such a well-directed podcast, and it's like an incredible joy to listen to. So many film podcasts just kind of become this freewheeling discussion of like just things that they thought were weird, and I really again have to hand it to you for all of the research that goes into that, and the passion that you bring for bringing these creative people back into public consciousness or queer consciousness. I guess in terms of like the people who appear in your films, could you talk a little bit about the masculine aesthetics of this era? There's sort of like a rugged butch look that happens in a lot of the clips.
Yeah.
And you talked about like the lead into like the Castro clone era of the late 70s. Could you talk a little bit about the politics of masculine presentation?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. You know, in the films from like the early 70s, you don't really see, you know, in the films from that era, I guess kind of the ideal is, you know, younger guys or like hippie guys or surfer guys or things like that. And it's really not until the mid 70s that you really start seeing like quote unquote butch becoming like the norm. People like Jack Wrangler and Al Parker and Richard Locke, especially, really kind of like establishing that look and making it like the ideal. And I think kind of part of that has to do with the fight against like Anita Bryant in the Briggs Initiative, and you know, kind of the rising homophobia in the late 70s as kind of a response to, you know, we're not Nelly Queens, we're like butch men, we're masculine men. And I think it's fascinating too because I mean that whole image is just a different form of drag in itself.
Mm, whoa.
Especially in these films where, you know, these people are playing characters.
Right. Well, that kind of brings me to um, maybe in the course of researching this film, were there particularly overt politics that made it into some of these filmmakers' work?
Sure.
It sounded like Light from a Second Story Window was very explicitly political in terms of what was happening in Los Angeles at the time. But maybe throughout the films you're looking at, who are the really overtly political filmmakers, or what were the implicit political messages that you found?
I think the big one for me is Arthur Bresson. You know, people know him now for, you know, his films Gay USA and Buddies, but his second narrative film, Forbidden Letters, was inspired by a real life experience where he was exchanging letters with a man who was in prison. And one of his letters got sent back to him because the people at the prison thought it was obviously meant for a woman and not for another man. And that kind of inspired this film, which is about a gay man whose lover goes to jail, and out of fear that, you know, an outing would lead to his partner being put in isolation or like denied parole, he's not able to write these letters to his partner, so he saves them all in a notebook, and he winds up reading through the letters, waiting for his lover to get out of prison. And then, you know, when he finally does, it's like, are they still going to be together? Are things going to be the same? Was he broken in prison? It really grapples with a lot of really interesting questions, and it's a really haunting film. It's actually being re-released this weekend through pinklabel.tv, thanks to the Bresson Project. I would highly recommend checking it out. So
He's one filmmaker in particular that's so fascinating that, like you mentioned, that there is that interweaving of both the political and the intimate in a lot of them, up to his last film, which isn't, it's a dramatic film, like basically the first narrative dramatic film made about HIV/AIDS. Could you so it's funny, we were talking a little bit before recording this, that I think we had spotted each other from afar at the one National Gay and Lesbian Archives here in Los Angeles. So you had been doing research. You know, probably the two black Levi denim wearing mustachioed guys cruising the archives for material for research purposes. But could you talk about the process of researching this film in terms of the print archives and clippings and ephemera? Where did it take you?
sure. You know, the print stuff is mostly for my Instagram feed. I use a lot of different sources. I use ProQuest and, you know, online archives. The one trip I wasn't necessarily looking. Actually, let me start that over. Sorry, I keep restarting these questions.
You're good. Because we had,
I
yeah, sorry.
okay. I use a lot of different sources and archives and different places for. It's really a lot for my Instagram feed because I do daily posts on that and I need like new things every day. A lot of the stuff I post on there too is from my own collection. I I think the most interesting things that I saw when I was at one last October though were going through the Pat Rocco collection actually, and really I think the most interesting thing for me there was seeing the original scripts for the Light from the Second Story Window, which we talked a lot about on the podcast, is comparing the film to the actual script to the actual novel that it was based off of. it's really one thing to like see these things online and to look at old magazines online. It's a really another thing to actually be there and like leafing through them and seeing like handwritten correspondence or advertising materials in progress or personal photos and things like that. I I really want to try to get out to another archive when things clear back up, hopefully soon.
I imagine it can be so. I mean, it's personal, like you said, if you're seeing like handwritten correspondence and notes written in the margin, but it must give you a kind of broader sense of the world into which these films were being released and when they were being made and how they were in conversation with other things happening in different cities and around the country. That kind of leads me to an interesting question. So a lot of the, I guess we think about like some of the gay hubs of 1970s, hubs of gay life in the United States, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, also being the hubs for the production of a lot of these films. Were there other countries or other regions that were involved, or did any of your research take you to different places that were a little off the beaten path?
I didn't use it in my film, but there was one film that was shot in Denver. It was highly touted for being shot in Denver, of all places. Really, though, the only other country that actually had like a gay film industry was Paris at the time. And I think I used a couple French films in the making of my film. Yeah, and that only lasted a couple years too, because there was a loophole in the Canadian censor board, or sorry, not Canadian, the French censor board that allowed these films to actually get produced and screened theatrically. So yeah, I mean, it's mostly concentrated between San Francisco, LA, and New York, though.
And what's amazing too about those films is the way that they document or really, make the spaces queer. When I'm thinking about some of the dock scenes, like the extended, like kind of decaying like piers in New York, or some of like the more urban settings, the adult theaters, the tea rooms that you look at in your film that were kind of the fantasy spaces for the filmmakers and for the men who are watching these films.
I just want to point out that as something I didn't realize until like midway through my editing, and it was kind of when like my brain was like finally starting to shatter from like looking at all this stuff and putting it all together, was realizing that I think 5 or 6 of these films are shot in the same tea room.
Wow. Yeah, I was wondering, it's like
the same director.
They were not the same director?
Not the same director. So there was like a tea room in LA that was like a famous space where they can film in with no problems. And all these
I was gonna say, if they were like, were they warehouses or factories or something where it would be private rather than like a public toilet or whatever, but
I don't know, but I read a review of one of the films from San Francisco's Bay Area Reporter, though, and even in that, the reviewer is complaining about seeing the same bathroom over and over again in these movies, which I thought was.
You can't, you don't necessarily make them for the critics, right?
People aren't paying attention to these movies.
Right, yeah, exactly. And there was a fandom, right? Could you talk a little bit about where these films can be found today? I think some of the labels that come up are folks like Vinegar Syndrome, who put out, they aim to be like the criterion of kind of like exploitation genre and some adult cinema, or like auteurs. You'd mentioned Pink Label, places like that. I guess, are there particular labels that put out specific studios or filmmakers' works that people should look at if they're interested in following?
Yeah, I would point people in the direction of Bijou Video, who own the Hand in Hand Films catalog and a few other catalogs. They've done amazing work, keeping these films in print for decades and available. Vinegar Syndrome does incredible work. Their Wakefield Pool releases are amazing. They also did the restorations of all those Arthur Bresson films for Pink Label and for the Bresson Project. And really, there's not too many other people who are like re-releasing these movies or restoring these movies. So I hope that my film can kind of help gear up some more interest and make these sort of releases more commercially viable. Because I think that's the big thing, is that they don't sell a lot, and companies like Vinegar Syndrome can't really justify sinking a lot of time into those when 80s horror movies will sell more.
Right. I think this film will definitely um, encourage people to seek out more of what you've kind of uncovered and put together. Um, Another aspect of the film that I think you handle beautifully is the music. And I'd read online that you weren't really pulling music from without the films. These were usually music that happens on screen, but it helps kind of blend the different scenes together. Um, and I know folks like Josh Sean of Dark Entries have an interest in this era of porn music, especially like gay porn music. But it kind of crosses over to above ground, underground cinema. Could you talk a little bit about the music of gay porn?
Sure. You know, for the most part, these filmmakers kind of used whatever they wanted. They knew that people would never publicly admit to going to see these movies, so they had no problems with stealing like Pink Floyd music or disco music or classical music. Some did have original music though. The Joe Gage movies all, for the most part, had original music, and I know Dark Entry. I've been working with Dark Entries on some projects relating to those, which is just really exciting. But yeah, with my film, I didn't add anything to the actual. I didn't add any music to it. I didn't add any sound effects to it. Everything that's in there is from the original films themselves.
And one, I guess, one kind of parting thing for me is just the scenes that you look at. Um, I love the way that your film takes a look, not just at the sex, but sort of creating this or recreating this gay life world. I mean, the interplay between the characters, the sort of like the fictional dramatic elements in the films, beyond just like the sexual encounters, harkens back to a different time. And I really love the way that your film puts them together and kind of creates something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Could you talk a little bit about maybe what you discovered, kind of like the emotional crux of this film in terms of I guess maybe past outlooks or maybe even militancy or what some of these filmmakers said about what it was to be gay or not be gay or being gay for pay?
Yeah, no, I think the thing that's kind of funny. I assembled the film with the intent of it being like fun and kind of light. But then like when I actually finished, like when I sat down and I watched the entire thing, once I finished putting it together, I realized that there's kind of something bittersweet about it. Especially the ending where there's that. It's the only actual. I kind of consider it the only actual sex scene in the entire thing, which is the like the romantic one at the end.
Yeah, you were interested, or we were talking about the kind of like the emotional crux or sort of the outlook of some of these filmmakers beyond just the erotic. And especially I think the closing scene of the film and some of the footage you have from take one, where people are like leaving the cinema and it becomes this bittersweet, you said, self-referential kind of moment. Could you talk about what you discovered like in putting all these clips together, sort of the kind of the emotional tone of the film beyond just like humor?
Sure. Yeah. I really kind of thought the whole thing would be, fun and lightweight when I was putting it together, but it wasn't until I sat down and like watched the whole thing that I realized that it is kind of bittersweet. It's I almost kind of like want to describe it almost as being like kind of a memory almost. I knew I wanted the ending to be tender, but I think it really kind of works very well. I don't know really how to explain it. I didn't want it. I didn't want to end it too down or too much as a joke or anything like that. I'm very serious about these. God, I'm sorry. This question is like fucking with me.
It's what happens when I ask like 5 questions in one. So it's okay. But that's totally fine, and I think that really comes across. It is something that I think invites multiple watches.
Yeah.
There's different nuance that comes out on top of being, like very passionate and sexual before getting like too hardcore, of course. But like you don't necessarily focus on that the whole time, but.
Yeah, and I've actually had a few friends, or I've had a few people say to me after watching it, and like it was really after the last festival played at Wicked Queer, who said that the party sequence in it really kind of hit them emotionally just because we're in the middle of COVID-19 and quarantine,
Mhm.
and they thought, seeing all these people having fun together was like kind of a really emotional moment for them. So
What was the source of that kind of like acid drag party? Out of curiosity,
it's Tom
party.
DeSimone's film Confessions of a Male Groupie,
Okay.
uh, which is he at the time that he made that, he had been making these movies for Shan Sales, who owned the Park Theater in LA, and these movies were just ground out. He would do a movie a week, scripting, shooting, scripting, casting, shooting, editing, doing the promotional materials, all that in a single week. And then finally he decided, I'm burnt out on this. I want to do one that I actually want to do. So he was able to spend some time working on that one. And it's a really special movie. I love that movie so much. That's one I'd actually really recommend to people checking out if they have any interest in what this genre could be. Yeah.
That's a great recommendation. I look forward to checking that one out. It's that entire party sequence. Yeah, even though you said like in the midst of COVID, it's a little bit like jarring to be like, oh, I want to go there, but also like they're being totally irresponsible, whatever. But like it's an amazing sequence, and one that's radically different from a lot of the other kinds of you know shots that are in the film, and it would just really kind of takes your breath away, but totally works in the whole of the film. We're wrapping up and getting close to the end of our time here, so I wanted to give you kind of the last word, and especially if there's anything that you are on the hunt for as like an inveterate collector. Oh, and I think you brought some things from your collection. I don't know if
I actually did.
what's that?
Should I go through them all?
Yeah, it's a yeah. It sounds like you have some things from your collection that you might want to share as a kind of show and tell.
Yeah, just kind of, I guess, as a way of showing like the sort of things that my Instagram and the film are trying to kind of explore. Two older gay newspapers. We have Drummer, an early issue of Drummer before it became a leather magazine, and an early issue of The Advocate with Fred Halstead on both. Um, like I said before, I think one of the big breakthroughs with me discovering these films was realizing that they were very much a part of mainstream gay culture.
Mhm.
You know, these filmmakers became like major gay celebrities at the time. They were people like Fred Halstead were very controversial at the time. So it's those. I've got a program from the Park Theater, Summers.
Oh, whoa, that's excellent.
These programs were always really wonderful. I don't know if people can really see it, but
Oh, gorgeous.
I just love the hand lettering, and it's very handmade.
That lettering comes up in a lot of the Pat Rocco promotional stuff. Was that? Do you know if that was his handwriting or who that was? Who was doing
It
that?
was not his handwriting, but it was someone who worked at the Park Theater. It's interesting seeing that handwriting pop up in like ads for like straight movies too,
Right.
because they produce straight movies. Yeah.
Those are gorgeous. So if people want to follow more of your discoveries and the things that you have unearthed around Ask Anybody, where can they find that?
Though they can, I kind of keep the Instagram most updated. It's at Ask Anybody. I also have a website which is ask-any-buddy.com. And then the podcast is on every major podcast platform and on Spotify too. So.
Like I said, I can't emphasize enough what a well-made and researched and enjoyable podcast it is to listen to. If you're a fan of film history in general, or of queer history, or a fan of art in general, which I think a lot of these films really are, and what makes a good film and what makes a good porn film, you should absolutely check out the Ask Anybody podcast. So I kind of want to give you the last word. If there's anything you want to say, or if there's something that you're looking for, or where the film can be seen next.
I'm not exactly sure where it'll be seen next. We're still like navigating the terrain of online festivals and seeing wherever that takes us. Again, I'll keep that up to date on the Instagram feed and on the website. If there's anyone out there who has collections that they're trying to get rid of, reach out to me. I'll gladly take it or gladly see what you have. But yeah, I hope everyone out there who watches the film enjoys it and takes something away from it.
Absolutely. I think there's something for everyone in a kind of weird sense. There's something for everyone as long as you are comfortable with male nudity. So, Evan, I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for bringing this film to Outfest, and for making an incredible work and continuing to unearth this history.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It really means a lot. And thanks for this conversation.
Absolutely. We look forward to seeing more of the history that you are writing and talking about. I can't emphasize this enough. Stay cool. I'm sweating like a pig, like I said. So we hope you can bring this film back to make a sort of like gay porn homecoming to LA. I think a lot of people would really enjoy it, to see it in a crowd when that's possible. So we look forward
I'd love
to
to.
Los Angeles. Yeah. Outstanding. Well, thanks, Evan. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.